got to test this darn thing. I did one yesterday. My microphone's faulty, so there is no known way to test your microphone on YouTube. That's not it. So I'm going to go live now. So the only way I worked out to do it is to see myself live on YouTube, to hear what the sound is like. So I've never gone on YouTube live before to watch. I've only gone to listen. So let's see if I can find a way of doing it a couple of minutes before I start, so I don't want to waste. Oh, there we are. I found it now. It's pretty good. I found it. Let's see what it sounds like. It's better to do a couple of minutes. Oh, it's working. Found it. Okay. Let's see what it sounds like. Oh, it's very clever. Because yesterday I did an hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes of my live story. I only find the microphone was faulty. It's got an intermittent fault. So now I know it's working, because what I did is I went on YouTube Live, put my name in it, and saw this was working. Okay, back to my life story now. So luckily, you can't forget your life story. So if you did a video on your life story and lost it, there's something there for another time. Just have to remember it and do it again. So it begins 1960. My memories go back a very long time. I was in my cot in my bedroom for the first memory of my life. My mother gave me a bottle of Ribena, which was freezing cold, and I screamed because it was painful. And I remember thinking, I can't tell you what I'm thinking, so it must have been before I could even talk, so that must have been a very long time ago. I've got various other little memories which can probably be dated. We'll go to my first memory when I was year and 11 months. Yeah, almost a year and 11 months, because we went to Paris. And I described the funny little man who looked like Mr. Magoo in the wooden lift, standing in the corner with his black hat and his round glasses, to my mother. She says, "Oh, that's exactly what he was like." I said, "I know, I remember him." And then we went down into the breakfast, to the restaurant downstairs in the hotel. My father had a big package, opened it up, and he took my Sunny Bisc out. And my mother said, "It's because you might not like the food in once we brought your breakfast from home," which I thought was a very nice touch. And then I remember walking out into the street with my parents and grandparents, walking outside the hotel on the road in Paris. I would have been a year and 10 or 11 months then. And then when I was about 2.5, I was always a collector. And I got a shilling every week to buy a Matchbox car from the shop up the road. So I had a lot of cars, all other cars, and I was fascinated by cars, always have been. And I collected cars. I've always collected things. I collected coins as well. And I collected rocks, then train tickets, etc. Always collected something. So my mother was working a lot of the time, so I had a nanny that I used to stay with. But when I was at home before school, I was at home with my mother. And I had these traffic jams. I was about 2.5 years old, and I said, "Oh, I'm so bored, I want to go to school." So my mother got in touch with the local nursery school, the primary school with the nursery department. And I remember my first interview, they said they'd get me in a year early, week before Christmas, just to see how I liked it. So I certainly remember being in the headmaster's office, married couple with 2 children who owned it, but the husband, the headmaster, died after a year or 2. I certainly remember standing in there with my mother when they were going through it all. I think it must have been my arrival interview. So I turned up a week before the December holidays, 1962. And I worked out I must have been delivered by my father in the morning, because my mother would be doing other things at work. And must have been delivered at the headmaster's office in his house at the front of the building, which has only just been demolished 2 years ago because they didn't have enough pupils. It was there until 2 years ago, the whole place. So I must have been sent on my own to walk from the headmaster's building to the classroom, past the hall. And I'd never heard Christmas carols before, and I got to the hall and they were all singing Away in a Manger, no crib for a bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. Now, I didn't know what a crib or a manger was. So I was standing there listening to Away in a Manger, thinking, what on earth are they singing about? And that was my first memory of being at school, December 1962. So many memories of the school. There were all these like asbestos prefabs in the school grounds, the classrooms, and they were nice enough buildings inside. You wouldn't notice from inside. And then we moved to the porter cabin. Well, it was a trolley, you know, these trailers, which we had in both the schools. My primary school had the first one, which we looked out the window and watched it as it rolled up on the lorry, and we went into it. And then they got a second one next door to it, which is still there because I went there for a reunion. Now they've got about 3 more. They're meant to be temporary. They're good things, those trolleys. Anyway, normally these trolleys have got white walls, but for some reason, second year I was there, the trolley had yellow gloss walls, which sounds like a very unimportant detail, but it's an important detail because what would happen was we were sitting in the classroom with the teacher giving us a lesson, and she suddenly stood up and said, "Tony." He said, "Yes." "What's going on?" "Nothing." "Are you sure, Tony? You sure there's nothing going on?" "No, miss." And the little girl sitting next to Tony sort of did that, pointed to the yellow wall, and the teacher walked up and says, "Tony, what have you done?" "Nothing, miss." And it turned out that Tony had a little accident in his pants, and in order to hide the evidence, he'd removed it from his pants and smeared it thinly across the wall into a circle about 3 feet wide. So the entire wall was smeared with poo. Anyway, I knew somebody who was about 6'5" tall and skinny as a rake, like a pole. He was doubled up in laughter telling him that story. It's been the story I have used ever since. Going ahead to 1965, when I moved house and ended up in Finchley and went to school there. The similar story there was Alan, who was snowing from his trousers. I was sitting halfway down the table looking at the teacher on about a 4 or 6 person table. We all had tables. He was on the table opposite me, further away from the teacher. So I turned round, the teacher walked up and said, "Alan, what's that?" Again, "Nothing, miss." "There's snow on the floor, Alan." "I know, miss." "Stand up," and the snow was falling down his black grey school trousers. "Alan, open your pockets." And all this squidgy, squashed mashed potato was peeling out of his pockets onto the floor. Turned out he didn't like mashed potatoes, so he'd filled his pockets with the balls of mashed potato and shoved them in, hoping nobody would notice, but gravity took its toll and the mashed potato leaked out and fell on the floor. So that was our other story. We had, the program has slowed down. We had two girls, well, one girl who was urinary incontinence, we should say. So we'd be on Louise patrol. "Miss, Louise has wet herself. Come on, Louise, let's go to the toilet." We'd all be sitting, this classroom was in rows actually. We all had tables and we were in long rows. That was a couple of years later, I think. And the old program's not responding. We'll get there in the end. We'll get there. I don't know if it slows down here, it slows down at your end. So we'd be on these parallel tables and somebody would notice the puddle and say, "Louise has wet herself, miss." And then Anna, in our school hall on the party flooring, we'd all sit down cross-legged listening to classical music on the record player and then singing. There was a little circular puddle appeared around Anna, and it grew bigger and bigger until she was like a desert island surrounded by the sea. "Miss, Anna's wet herself. Come on, Anna." She stood up and left this big circular puddle on the parquet floor. So, most school stories are toilet related. What can you do? That's the way it works. I was always a great reader, not story books, never much into that, but reference books, technical books. And when I was about 4, my parents had Dr. Spock, and I had read it from beginning to end. I was fascinated with medicine. And by the time I was about 7, they had to buy a hardback because I'd worn it out. I'd read it so much. And I got into medical books because there were diseases in Mr. Spock, Dr. Spock. I was fascinated by them. So I read my parents' medical book, and then I read a book called Human Heredity, with the second half was all the hereditary diseases, which our friends said I could take home because I was so interested in it. So I learnt that almost off by heart. So I'd learnt all the diseases and symptoms so I could diagnose. And by about the age of 10 or 11, I was diagnosing people's illnesses on television, and friends and family and everything. It was a simple flow diagram. So I wasn't trained in anatomy, physiology, or treating illnesses, but it was easy to diagnose because you start off, certain symptoms go together, cut them apart. And if you've got 3 or 4 symptoms and they're going together, there are only 1 or 2 things it could be. And you eliminate the things it couldn't be. So you either know the illness and connect the symptoms, or don't know it and work it out by eliminating what you are getting and what you're not getting, where it could be and where it couldn't be. And you get the same answer. Many doctors can't do that. They're trained as doctors, but they don't know the first thing about diagnosing anything they're not trained particularly to do, because they can't work it out, which is a great shame. You'd think all that training, they would know what to do. Hang on, that's better. So then I became interested in psychology and psychiatry. I had a vision of this German psychiatrist who understood everything about people. And then years later, I went to a psychic medium who told me, oh, you're in the healing business, and went on to tell me that I had a spirit guide who was this German doctor, and another psychic told me what his name was. So either that was the guide or my past life, because I went to a new school when I was 12. I was ringing people up and they started telling me their problems. They'd be on the phone for ages, and I know what to say and understood them. I thought, well, I've got business here. I want to do this professionally. So when I was 13, I got books on psychiatry and learnt all the psychiatric illnesses and psychology, loads of medical books. There's too much maths in it, and I couldn't do maths. So by the time I was 16, 17, doing A-levels, I couldn't cope with the maths in all those subjects. And also, when I was about 12, I went to see my friend in hospital and saw what an awful place it was. So I decided to go from fixing bodies to fixing minds, because it's very different on paper to how they are in real life. So that was my ambition. My other ambition was to entertain people. But you needed an equity card to do that, and you had to work for about 2 years to get one. You don't now, you just have to do £500 of paid work, which I might have been able to do then, but not now. So I started off doing a local production of Oliver when I was 12 and 13, which was great fun. And then when I was 14, I went to weekly drama classes. And then when I was, how old was I? About 17, I think 18, I went to the Oliver Place, which was the local theatre club and school, and did 2 evenings a week of drama. Also, when I was 16, I did go to college to do drama A-levels, the trouble being that the 3 A-levels, one was by choice and the other 2 were drama and English literature, which was a subject I couldn't bear doing because it was boring. Turned out that the drama A-level consisted mainly of analysing plays, which were just the same as doing English literature, only plays. Aeschylus, the Orestian trilogy. So a week of that was enough. And I rang up 2 or 3 places and said, can I do science A-levels, please? I can't cope with this. And the local college was doing them a week after we finished. They started a week after we started, so I didn't even lose any time. I arranged to do that. So I rushed back to London and did a year of science A-levels before the maths beat me and I had to switch to the arts. Now, when I was 5, my best friend was Peter, and his parents, certainly his mother, became my mother's best friend. And he followed me 3 schools because we were at primary school together. He went to secondary school, I went to my different schools, and then we ended up back at the local college for A-levels. We both got thrown out after a year and went to the tutorial college where I've been already. And he always looked after me. He always bought my lunch. He'd take me out, buy me a drink, buy me dinner, wherever we were. Amazing guy. then got caught up in drugs and married a woman his father didn't like, and his father basically disowned him when he was about 25, 26. He'd already moved out of London, and he never bothered to come back and keep in touch with his old friends, which is a great shame. But he was part of our soul group because his mother was very overweight and diabetic, and in 1981 she dropped dead suddenly of a heart attack. My mother went over to comfort her father, apparently ended up moving in and marrying him. So I haven't got any close family apart from my mother, so he's my stepbrother, but it's a lot of use, that is, not being around. So he was a fixture of my first 15 years after I joined the primary school, and he was around for another 5 years, coming and going when he moved out of London. So that was that. I'll refer to my notes now. Oh yes, the year off that wasn't. My quarter of my family, my grandmother's family, except my grandmother, followed their brother to Australia in 1948. And the only one that didn't go was their older sister, who was my grandma. So all the quarter of our relatives are in Australia. So I've never been there, but they've been here many times. But there's an awful lot of them. Lots and lots of second cousins and first cousins. I've seen about maybe half of them, but none of the older ones, because they didn't come back after they'd gone. They started dropping off by the 60s. But their children and the other side, who were slightly younger, and the younger brothers and sisters and cousins, most of them have been here. So 1976, one of them with his wife was down here in my gap year, which was gap 6 months. I did my O-levels early. I couldn't do my A-levels till I was 16, so I had a year off, half a year or so. When I was working for my grandparents' shop mainly, I started weekends and holidays from 14 to about 24, and had a visa and everything all worked out. And then our relatives, it's first cousin, father's first cousin came. Oh, you don't want to go there. It's boring as anything. It's the middle of winter. All your relatives will be working. I have nothing to do. I wouldn't recommend it. And by coincidence, my mother's friend who had gone to Israel was visiting and said, oh, don't worry, I'll get him somewhere to stay in Israel. So we arranged that. I spent a few days in Paris with a few friends before that and came back ready to go to Israel. Turned up in Israel, spent the first night in a sleeping bag on the guy's floor with somebody else in his spare room. Then the next night on my own in the sleeping bag on the floor in the next room. Then the next night I was with my cousins up the road on the floor in a sleeping bag. So after about 4 days, I said, I thought I was going to be staying with a family up in the north of Israel. Oh, got a bit of a problem there, actually. I'll never understand this excuse. Their grandmother had died and they'd gone to Belgium for the funeral. Now, why that would stop me staying there for 3 months, nobody knows. But after the 5th day, once I knew I had to go home, I went to the travel agent and said, I would like to go and stay in Eilat for a while by the sea. They said, how old are you? I said, 16. Not British, sorry, I'm not Israeli, I haven't got an Israeli passport. Oh, security, you can't travel on your own under 18 if you don't have an Israeli passport. So I wasn't even allowed to get the coach to Eilat to go and stay there on my own because of the security. So I had to basically go home after 5 days and pretty much cocked up my only chance to live in a foreign country, which is a great shame because I've never had the time or the inclination to do it since. So I went to see a very nice football match at Maccabi Tel Aviv just before I left. So it was fun, but it was a bit of a wasted effort. For some reason, I don't even have any photos. I don't know why I didn't bring the camera with or use it, but I did a lot of photos, but discovered a few holidays where I didn't take it, or one when it didn't work, or 2 when it didn't work. So I don't have pictures of everything. So that was my story up to 16. So I've got my notes here. Don't want to lose anything. So I did all this yesterday, and I took a lot longer. So I think I've cut out a lot of the deadwood repetition and everything else. So basically, I'll be doing maybe 3 decades in one go and 3 decades in another go. The highlights, of course, of 61 years. So I did end up wanting to do psychotherapy, counselling. That's right, my degree. Got one offer to do psychology, because wanting to do psychology, back then they didn't have counselling or psychotherapy. They had psychoanalysis, which was different, psychiatry or psychology. So I wanted to be a psychologist. So didn't get the A-level grades to do my psychology course. So I wanted to do a proper vocational degree. So we had a little chat with our neighbour who's an accountant, because I found law, which my parents did, was boring. So I do accountancy. So I looked at the book, and apart from the maths, I was good at statistics, got an A in O-level statistics and couldn't do my O-level maths. Anyway, I did the foundation course in accountancy, where we have to do 5 subjects, maths and stats was one of them. And surprise, surprise, I failed that, and I failed economics. I had sociology and economics, which I had for A-level. But I only did 6 months to do my economics A-level, because it was a third one, so I didn't get good enough grades to do 2 A-levels. I had to do 3. So I wasn't that good at economics. So I passed the other subjects, and my resits were economics and maths, and I had to do maths day 1 and economics day 2. And I just spent 2 weeks doing maths, and amazed myself I passed the maths, because there was enough statistics in it. And I had a very good teacher called Uncle Eric, lovely bloke. He used to give me loads of private tuition. So it was enough to get through the maths at degree level, and had to do the economics the following day, and I hadn't done enough revision, so I failed that. And they said, well, it's going to be disaster if you even made it to year 2, because it would have been all figures then. I couldn't do the figures in year 1, but they said the good news is you were very good at law. They're a great lecturer. And they said, go upstairs, because it was accounts, law, social work in our block. So I went upstairs to the law department and interviewed, and they said, oh yes, you can come do the law degree. So I ended up doing law after all that anyway. Not happy enough with which I found I could do postgraduate as a counselling course part-time. So I did that for 3 years and qualified. So I ended up back doing what I was born to do. As for the entertainment, of course, I couldn't get the equity card. So I was always doing bits and pieces from about the age of 15 onwards. From my friend with the mobile disco, I would do music on the piano with funny songs and impressions and things. And I did that and played the piano in various venues, weddings and bar mitzvahs and that sort of thing for about another 30 years on and off, but never enough to get an equity card. But it's always nice to do it. And I've always been open to the opportunity to do it any chance I can get, especially on the TV, which is my favourite venue. 1967, my grandpa was a guitarist. He was on TV a lot, and sometimes he'd take me with him. And he did the Christmas show for Blue Peter. So I went and met Val and Chris, and nearly got my hand bitten off by Petra. I met Jason and Patch, and Biddy Baxter introduced us. We went into her office, and Val and Chris came in and said hello. We went off to the studio, and I stood around the edge while it was still live and watched my grandpa walk around dressed in biblical robes with a donkey, with all the children following and playing a Christmas carol, with all the children saying behind, which was nice. I got my Blue Peter badge and signed photo from them. And then many years later, I went to Mantovani, because it was with Mantovani every Sunday. And they go and rehearse. They were rehearsing. And back in those days, if you had a BBC pass, it was for the entire studios. So once I'd walked in through the front door, I had a BBC pass. The only rule is if there's a red light, you don't walk in, because they're filming. So every single studio without a red light, I put my head round and watched them rehearsing and doing what they were doing, and then went back, and it was all in a circle. So all the corridors are circular. It's fascinating. And then got back to the end, and we packed up and went back. Had a great time there at the BBC. I went back in 1989 to watch May to December, which was good fun. The outside scenes were filmed in Pinner High Road, if anyone's interested, because it was supposed to be in Pinner, and it was actually in Pinner. So those are these stories. So I have now reached the age of 31 when I qualified as a therapist, and we will stop there and carry on with the times after it. You'll notice I haven't mentioned many relationships. I wonder why that is. Well, the main reason is that the relationships were a bloody disaster. Every single one of them. There was not a single relationship that wasn't a disaster. I will go through some of the highlights of the best and, well, yes, only the best, because the worst ones aren't worth repeating. Best relationships, 1975. I went to a disco, danced with 8 girls, 7 girls in fact. They all walked off the other way. I was fed up. 9:15 it was. I went to the loo, came back, an absolute angel walked in late, danced with her, and went out with her for about 2 months, although I was away for a month. I only saw her for a month. She was perfect. She would have been marriage material. Like my grandparents were the same ages that we were when they met, and they were married for 67 years. So, you know, you get the right one. Anyway, I was a bit of a Hell's Angel type. I wasn't even old enough to have a motorbike till I was 16, but I still had the long hair and leather jacket, and brought her daughter back late and didn't have very nice table manners. And the mother said, "You're not seeing that boy again." And that was the end of that. So it was very difficult when I'd already met the right one to meet anyone else after that. There was a very nice one, 1979, who was it 1980, round about then. And after about 3 months, I was waiting for her at the station. I thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to talk about tonight? She was a lovely girl, very intelligent, very attractive, but I think we had nothing to talk about. She didn't turn up. She was thinking the same thing. So I had to analyse all the reasons why it went wrong. It turned out that she ticked all the boxes except one big one. She didn't have a sense of humour. Without a sense of humour, you have nothing. You have a dead block of wood, really, without a sense of humour. So since then, I've analysed that you need to have all the major qualities, line, which is the pass mark, and as long as they pass all of them, they don't need to be outstanding in one, because if they're outstanding in one and haven't got another one, you'll only notice after a while what's missing. So I learnt, get an all-rounder, get somebody that ticks all the boxes, and I won't miss anything. Don't think I found any of them. No. 5 asked me to marry. None of them were the same person. I got engaged once for about 3 days because she dropped the hint to me. I didn't ask her, but I thought, well, she's better than some of the others. And then after 3 days, she changed her mind. So that was a good thing. She was the one that I lived with for 2 weeks. Absolute disaster. Only time I've lived with anyone. So I learnt through experience with that one. There was another one I met, been my friend's neighbour for years, and I'd only met her when we were 19. I asked her out, met her at a party, lovely girl. Went round to her house. It's funny, there's not much furniture, not much stuff in the house. 2 days later, oh, going abroad now. When you found out, oh, we're not, we're emigrating. So she, well, mind you, I suppose even if I'd met her and gone out with her, then she was still emigrated. So the end result would have been the same. But I never got the chance to do anything, which was a great shame. That was another one slipped through the net. So I've had about 5 that have wanted to marry me and about 5 that I've proposed to, and they all said no. Another one went back with her old boyfriend after a few weeks with me. That didn't end well for any of us except for them, I suppose, one way or another. So all of those have been a complete disaster, which is why I'm still single, because there have been plenty of offers made on both sides, but none of them have been mutual. Oh, and there were 2 or 3 that lived too far away as well. We tried it for a while, but you know, we were knackered by the time we met each other, driving 60 or 70 miles, so that was a waste of time. So that explains the current situation, why I'm still single. So have I missed anything else? Have I missed anything else? I don't think so. I think those are all the points that I covered yesterday. So we will carry on in the next day or two, and I'll do from 1991 to 2021 and see if I find anything else of the highlights of life in northwest London. Thank you. Goodbye.